A warning to our viewers. What you're about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. November 24th, 1989, Black Friday. While millions of Americans were sleeping off their Thanksgiving feast or heading out for holiday shopping, something far more sinister was about to unfold in the quiet town of Acme, Washington. 18-year-old Mandy Stavik was lacing up her running shoes for what would become the most horrifying jog in criminal history. A college freshman home for the holidays, she grabbed her loyal German shepherd, Kira, kissed her mother goodbye, and stepped into the crisp autumn air. Just another routine run, just another ordinary day, but nothing about this day would be ordinary. 2 hours later, Kira came racing home alone. Frantic, covered in mud and blood. Her leash was gone. Mandy was nowhere to be found. 3 days later, searchers would find her body floating in the Nooksack River. She'd been sexually assaulted, beaten unconscious, and left to drown. What happened during those missing hours would shatter the innocence of this tight-knit community forever. For the next 30 years, the residents of Acme would live with a chilling, inescapable truth. Somewhere among them, hidden behind a friendly face and a normal life, walked a killer. A killer who had been watching, waiting, and getting away with murder. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. November 1989. George H.W. Bush had just taken office. The Cold War was ending. America was experiencing a period of relative peace and prosperity. In small towns across the Pacific Northwest, life moved at a different pace. Slower, more trusting, more connected. Acme, Washington sat 40 miles northeast of Seattle, population 220. This wasn't a postcard-perfect town. It was a working community. Logging trucks rumbled down Highway 9. Families worked the land, raised livestock, sent their kids to Mount Baker High School just down the road. The Nooksack River cut through the valley, providing both beauty and purpose to a community that had thrived here for generations. In 1989, Acme was the kind of place where violent crime was virtually unheard of. The sheriff's department dealt with property disputes, maybe a bar fight on Saturday night, sexual assault, murder. These were urban problems, big city problems. Not here. Strand Road stretched like a ribbon through the heart of this community, a quiet, dead-end street where neighbors knew each other's routines, where an 18-year-old college student could jog safely in the late afternoon, earbuds in, without a care in the world. But on this particular Thanksgiving weekend, someone was watching those routines very carefully. Someone who lived right here, who belonged here, who no one would ever suspect. Someone who was about to shatter this community's sense of security forever. Amanda Teresa Stavik, everyone called her Mandy, was everything a small town celebrates. At 18, she embodied the American dream that places like Acme nurtured. A 1989 graduate of Mount Baker High School, she'd been the golden girl, varsity basketball star, cheerleader, honors student, the kind of young woman who made her community proud. Her mother, Mary Stavik, had brought her 3 children to Acme from Alaska years earlier, seeking a fresh start after her divorce. The family had already endured unimaginable tragedy. Mandy's older brother Brent had been murdered in Anchorage in 1975, a case that remains unsolved to this day. But Mary was determined to build a safe, loving home for Lee, Mandy, and Molly on Strand Road. Mandy was thriving at Central Washington University, pursuing her dreams with the same determination she'd shown on the basketball court. But Thanksgiving weekend was special, a time to return to the place that shaped her, to reconnect with family traditions, to simply be home. Friday, November 24th, 1989. The day after Thanksgiving. The big meal was over, dishes cleaned, family time enjoyed. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, Mandy decided to go for her usual jog. She typically ran with her mother, who would bike alongside her. But today she wanted to go alone. Just her and Kyra, the family's loyal German shepherd. She pulled on her teal-green sweatpants, light-colored sweatshirt, and her favorite light blue running shoes with purple stripes. She clipped her Walkman to her waistband, this was 1989, remember, and headed out the door. Her route was always the same, down Strand Road toward the Nooksack River, then back. A path she knew by heart, a route she'd run hundreds of times. Her brother Lee saw her jog past the Andersons' house halfway between home and Highway 9. She waved. Everything was normal. The last person to see Mandy Stavik alive was a man in a pickup truck. He watched as she ran right in front of him, heading toward home, just an eighth of a mile from her front door. He thought nothing of it. Just another routine evening in Acme. But roughly 2 hours later, Kyra returned to the Stavik house alone. No Mandy, just the dog, agitated, searching. The nightmare had begun. As we go into the most chilling details of this documentary, take a brief moment to like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, for more in-depth investigations and analysis of significant cases like this. Mary Stavik felt panic the moment she saw Kyra alone in the yard. Mandy never left her dog behind, never. Her first call was to Rick Zender, Mandy's boyfriend from high school who had driven her home from college. Then the sheriff, then every friend, every neighbor she could think of. Within hours, the entire community of Acme was mobilized. This wasn't just about one missing girl. This was about everyone's daughter, everyone's sister. Pickup trucks filled with volunteers spread across the rural roads. Flashlights cut through the growing darkness. Voices calling Mandy's name echoed across the farmland. Search and rescue teams combed every field, every ditch, every stand of trees. The hope was desperate clinging. Maybe she'd fallen, maybe she was hurt but alive, maybe she was just lost. In 1989, cell phones weren't an option. If something went wrong, you were truly alone. Saturday brought fresh volunteers and renewed urgency. Then, a discovery that sent hearts racing. A pair of green sweatpants found along a side road. Mary Stavik was brought to the scene. Could these be Mandy's? The pants were dirty, torn, nothing like what her careful daughter would wear. Mary didn't think they belonged to Mandy, but they were sent to the lab anyway. The analysis would prove inconclusive. Sunday, November 27th. 3 agonizing days after Mandy disappeared. Detective Ron Peterson was leading a search team in a Zodiac boat, methodically working their way up the Nooksack River. Peterson was a veteran officer, but nothing had prepared him for this case. As they navigated around a bend into a small side channel, Peterson saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Something pink in the shallow water. It was Mandy. She was found in knee-deep water, wearing only her running shoes and socks. Her clothes were gone. Her Walkman was gone. Everything that had been normal about that Friday afternoon jog had been violently stripped away. Peterson would later say that when he lifted her from the water, all he could think was how much she looked like his own daughter. Through tears, he whispered, "I got you." The medical examiner's findings confirmed everyone's worst fears. Mandy had drowned, but the shallow water made that impossible unless she'd been unconscious. An injury to her head suggested she'd been struck with enough force to incapacitate her. The evidence also confirmed she'd been sexually assaulted. In an instant, Acme's sense of safety evaporated. This wasn't a random tragedy. This was deliberate, calculated evil. Someone had watched this young woman, stalked her, attacked her, and left her to die. Someone who might still be among them. Detective Peterson had recently returned from FBI training on a revolutionary new investigative tool, DNA analysis. In 1989, this technology was in its infancy, used primarily for paternity cases, not criminal investigations. But Peterson understood its potential. Male DNA was recovered from Mandy's body, preserved, cataloged. But the technology to identify its source didn't exist yet. Not in 1989, not in small-town Washington. This genetic fingerprint would have to wait for science to catch up with justice. For now, it was evidence without answers, a clue without solutions, a promise that someday, somehow, the truth would surface. But that someday felt impossibly far away. The initial investigation was exhaustive and heartbreaking. Detectives followed every lead, interviewed every possible suspect, turned over every stone they could find. 30 local men voluntarily provided DNA samples, hoping to help solve the case that had shattered their community. 30 samples, 30 tests, 30 disappointments. None matched. Detective Ron Peterson carried Mandy's case like a weight on his soul. Years later, he would still become emotional talking about that November day, about lifting her from the river, about how much she reminded him of his own daughter. This wasn't just police work. This was personal. This was about justice for a girl who deserved so much more than what happened to her. But as the 1990s gave way to the 2000s, the brutal reality set in. The case was going cold. Leads dried up. The DNA evidence sat in storage, waiting for technology that didn't yet exist. Mandy Stavik watched year after year pass without answers, her hope slowly eroding with each anniversary of her daughter's death. For the people of Acme, life took on a different quality. Doors that had never been locked now had deadbolts. Children who had roamed freely now had curfews. The community that had once felt like the safest place on earth now carried a dark knowledge. Somewhere among them, a killer lived free. But the most haunting aspect wasn't just that the killer had escaped justice. It was the growing certainty that he was still there, still driving the same roads, still shopping at the same stores, still living his life while Mandy's had been cut brutally short. In 2009, 20 years after Mandy's murder, Detective Kevin Bowhay inherited the case. Bowhay was a Mount Baker High graduate himself. He'd attended the same school as Mandy, walked the same halls, understood what the community had lost. This case wasn't just another cold file to him. It was personal. Bowhay brought fresh eyes to decades-old evidence. He developed a strategy that was both simple and ambitious. A systematic DNA sweep of every man who had been living in the Acme area in 1989. He would track down residents from that time period, explain the situation, and ask for voluntary DNA samples. It's just a matter of time, Bowhay told himself. We're going to ask the right person, or we're going to get the right sample. We just got to keep plugging away. By 2013, Bowhay had collected and tested dozens of additional DNA samples. Each test raised hopes. Each negative result brought new disappointment. But he refused to give up. Then, in June 2013, something extraordinary happened. Something that would prove that sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places. Two mothers, Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, were spending a sunny Friday afternoon at Birch Bay waterslides with their children. As they sat watching their kids play, the conversation drifted to local topics, including the unsolved case that still haunted their community. Both women had grown up in Acme, both had attended Mount Baker High School, and both, it turned out, had harbored the same dark suspicion for more than 2 decades. A suspicion about a man who had lived right down the road from the Stavik family. A man who had attended the same high school as Mandy. A man whose name had somehow never appeared on any suspect list, Timothy Bass. But what they knew about him would change everything. It was a perfect Friday afternoon in June 2013. Mothers with young children scattered across the grassy area at Birch Bay waterslides, watching their kids splash and play. For Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, it should have been just another peaceful summer day. Both women had barely known each other in high school, despite attending Mount Baker at the same time. But as their children played, they found themselves drawn into conversation about their shared hometown, their shared memories, and inevitably, their shared trauma. the unsolved murder of Mandy Stavik. The conversation might have ended there, just another discussion about the case that had haunted their community for nearly 24 years. But then, Heather said something that changed everything. "I know who killed her." Merrily stared at her. "I do too." And with those simple words, more than 2 decades of silence began to crumble. Heather went first. She was 15 years old in the summer of 1989, just months before Mandy's murder. After a softball game, she'd climbed into a truck with some friends, including 21-year-old Tim Bass. She'd sat between Bass and the driver, a young man named Dan, who would later become her husband. What happened next had stayed with her for years. Bass began flirting aggressively, commenting on her eyes, telling her how beautiful they were. Then he took a pen from the cup holder and began rubbing it along her bare knees as she sat there in her cut-off sweatpants. She was terrified but tried to play along, knowing Dan's presence would prevent anything worse. But the incident stuck with her. In a small community like Acme, she made sure to avoid Tim Bass whenever possible. Merrily's story was even more chilling. In July 1991, 2 years after Mandy's death, she was home alone with her infant son when she heard a knock at the door. It was Tim Bass, claiming he'd been hunting and needed to use the phone to call his wife. When she handed him the phone, she heard the telltale beeps of a disconnected number. He wasn't really making a call. He'd lied. Then he walked through her kitchen toward her bedroom, telling her he used to drive by her house, that he'd always been in love with her, that he wanted to make love to her. Her husband was away. She was alone with a man who was now clearly a predator. She kept telling him no, but he persisted, trying to convince her to go into the bedroom with him. Finally, she threatened to call the police, and somehow, she never quite remembered how, she managed to get him out of her house. For years, both women had wondered if the man who had made them feel so unsafe could have done the same thing to other women, maybe even to Mandy Stavik. But they'd never spoken up, afraid of accusing someone without proof, afraid of the consequences in a small town where everyone knew everyone. But here at the water park, finding courage in each other's stories, they finally decided to act. Merrily contacted Detective Ken Gates, a Mount Baker High classmate who worked for the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office. She told him about their suspicions, about their disturbing encounters with Tim Bass. By 2013, Timothy Bass was 50 years old, married with 3 children, working as a delivery driver for Fran's Bakery. To his neighbors, he appeared to be just another working father in the community. But to detectives, he immediately became a person of interest. When police visited Bass at his home to ask about Mandy Stavik, his behavior was immediately suspicious. He claimed he barely remembered who she was. This about the most famous murder case in their small community's history, about a girl who had jogged past his house regularly. When asked to provide a DNA sample, Bass refused, saying he didn't trust the police, claiming he'd watched crime shows and knew how DNA could be used against innocent people. That refusal moved Timothy Bass to the top of their suspect list. Detective Bowhay ordered round-the-clock surveillance. They would follow Bass on his delivery routes, watch his every move, and wait for their opportunity to get the DNA sample they needed. The hunt for Mandy's killer had finally found its target. Kim Wagner had been working at Fran's Bakery when police first approached her in 2013. Initially, she'd shut them down, telling them to contact Human Resources. The request seemed too far above her pay grade. They wanted her help investigating one of her co-workers. But when Wagner later learned this was about the Mandy Stavik case, everything changed. She was 19 in 1989, living in the same community, understanding the fear that had gripped everyone after Mandy's murder. As a mother now herself, she thought about Mary Stavik, about a woman who had spent nearly 3 decades without answers about her daughter's death. "I 100% volunteered to do it," Wagner would later say. "If something happened to my daughter, I'd want someone to help me." For 3 months, Kim Wagner became the most important surveillance operative in Whatcom County. Every day at work, she watched Timothy Bass with the intensity of a detective. She studied his habits, his routines, where he ate, what he threw away. Bass was careful, almost obsessively so. He wore gloves during his deliveries and seemed to take his trash home rather than disposing of it at work. It was as if he understood on some level that leaving DNA evidence could be dangerous. But Wagner was patient. She emptied garbage cans to ensure they were clean, positioned herself to observe his every move, and waited for her moment. Finally, it came. The bakery had installed a new water cooler, and Wagner watched as Bass drank from one of the plastic cups. When he finished, he tossed it in the garbage. Wagner's heart was racing. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. She later described the intensity. "I looked in the garbage and my heart was beating out of my chest. I grabbed it and put it in my desk drawer. The plastic cup went to the Washington State Crime Lab for DNA analysis." The results would take months, but when they came back, they would change everything. Meanwhile, Wagner also collected a Coke can that Bass had discarded, providing investigators with a second sample to ensure accuracy. In late 2017, Detective Bowhay received the call he'd been waiting for. The DNA from Tim Bass's discarded cup and can matched the DNA recovered from Mandy Stavik's body in 1989. After 28 years, they had their killer. December 12, 2017, Timothy Bass was leaving his shift at Fran's Bakery when police moved in. Detective Bowhay approached him in the parking lot with backup officers ready. "You're under arrest for the murder of Mandy Stavik." Bass said nothing as the handcuffs went on. The man who had walked free for nearly 3 decades was finally facing justice. That same day, Mary Stavik's 81st birthday, the phone rang at her home. It was Sheriff Bill Elfo with news she had never expected to hear. "We got him," he said simply. "We got him." Mary Stavik, who had long given up hope that her daughter's case would ever be solved, could barely believe it. After 28 years of waiting, of wondering, of living with unanswered questions, justice was finally within reach. The nightmare that began on Thanksgiving weekend 1989 was about to end. In May 2019, Timothy Bass faced his reckoning in a Whatcom County courtroom. Leading the prosecution was Dave McEachran, the original prosecutor who had come out of retirement at age 73 to see this case through to its conclusion. He refused payment. This was personal. Bass's defense was desperate and unconvincing. He claimed he and Mandy had been having a secret sexual relationship, meeting when she jogged past his house. No one believed it. No evidence supported it. When asked why he'd never mentioned this relationship before his arrest, he had no answer. The most damaging testimony came from Bass's own family. His brother Tom took the stand, revealing that Tim had asked him to lie to police, to claim he too had slept with Mandy to make her appear promiscuous. Tom refused. Even more devastating was the testimony of Bass's ex-wife, Gina Malone. She admitted the alibi she had originally given him was false. She had no memory of being with him the day after Thanksgiving. Worse, she revealed years of emotional abuse, describing how Tim had controlled every aspect of her life, even telling her what to say to investigators. "I lived in prison for 28 years with him," she would later say. "Now it's his turn." The DNA evidence was overwhelming. The lies were transparent. The jury saw through every desperate attempt at deception. On May 24, 2019, exactly 29 years and 6 months after Mandy's murder, Timothy Bass was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape. The judge sentenced him to the maximum penalty, 27 years in prison. For the people of Acme, the verdict meant something profound. After 3 decades of looking over their shoulders, of wondering which neighbor might be a killer, they could finally breathe freely. The nightmare was over. Mary Stavik, now 82, had lived to see justice for her daughter. It couldn't bring Mandy back, but it brought something precious: the truth, and the knowledge that her daughter's killer would never hurt anyone else. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.